We want to go ahead and get started now. I want to thank you very much for attending. My name is Miguel Santiago. I represent the 53rd Assembly District, home to Skid Row, one of the worst humanitarian crises known on planet Earth. And we want to start by painting the picture, because in Skid Row, we've had decades and decades upon decades of lack of leadership, policies for over close to about 50 years that have not improved the area. And what we're doing today is we're doing one big, bold step, an infusion of money that we're proposing, the steroids that we need to kick off the improvement of Skid Row and other areas like that in the state of California. It's no secret that homelessness continues to increase. And today, we're here in strong support, our colleagues and I, of AB 3171, which I'm a co-author of, as well as Assemblymember Laura Freedman, who's a little bit north of us here. Now, this is different, and this is the time to do it, because for the first time in the state of California, we have close to $6 billion in surplus revenue. So if there was ever a time to act, the time to act is now. What's different about this is we're asking the cities to put some skin in the game. So we're not just going to give you money, and we're not just going to do flexible uses of it. You've got to go ahead and match it, and you've got to show us that you can put these monies to work to eradicate homelessness. Here in Los Angeles, which is home to about 25% of the homeless population across the state, and if those dollars equate, those percentages, we look close to about $400 million that the state would kick in. If the city matches it, which we know they will, we could look at close to about $1 billion coming into the city of Los Angeles. It's the steroids that we need to begin to eradicate it. So there'll be two pieces to this. There'll be legislation, AB 3171, and then there'll be the budget process, which we're going to go up and down the state and ensure that our colleagues understand how important this issue is. And we've got 11 big mayors with us that will help us lobby and help us push this through. And we're very honored to have Mayor Eric Garcetti, one of the leaders of this movement, to help us to advocate for this. Now, we've said this before. This is the time to do it. It's a true partnership. We've got a surplus, and never in our history have we seen such a horrible sight like people living on the streets. Humans have forgotten about other humans as they lay on the street. And we all know that face looks different. It's no longer just the gentleman out there. It's kids, it's seniors, it's veterans, it's our neighbors, and sometimes, yes, our family members. Lo importante de ahora para los medios de comunicación en español, que es la primera vez en el estado de California que se va a ver un movimiento tan agresivo como pedir al Estado 1.5 billones de dólares para atacar este problema de los desamparados. Y van a ser en dos diferentes propuestas. Primero, el proyecto de ley AB 3171. Y segundo, una batalla por el presupuesto del estado de California. Y este sería la primera vez que vamos a estar trabajando con las ciudades para hacer eso. Muchas gracias, and I want to introduce my colleague, Laura Freedman, who's also working with us on this issue of homelessness.
Thank you, Assemblymember Santiago. You heard the passion in his voice. That's the passion that he brings to this issue every single day. I would say good morning, but for far too many of our residents in Los Angeles, there are no good mornings. We have a crisis of homelessness on the streets of California, but what we don't have is a crisis in the hearts of the people of Los Angeles. Our collective hearts break every single time we walk past our neighbors on the streets. People want to do something. In fact, they've dug deep and they've passed measures, Measure H, Measure HHH, Measure JJJ, but that's not enough. We need more funding for true comprehensive services. At the same time that the federal government continues its downward spiral in funding through HUD for housing, for community services, in California, we're going to have to pick up the slack. We're going to have to dig deep as a state because this problem affects all of us. Increasingly, we're seeing women, we're seeing children, we're seeing veterans. Every single segment of our population is at risk given the rising housing costs around our state. And we have to treat this as the crisis it is. We're lucky in Los Angeles because we have a true visionary in Mayor Eric Garcetti, Someone who doesn't just talk about issues, but who forms comprehensive plans and fights every single day to enact meaningful policies to address the issues facing Los Angeles. So I'm proud to stand here to be able to introduce our mayor, Mayor Eric Garcetti. He's been a real champion of all of these issues. As Assemblymember Santiago and I work on a host of legislation up at the state level. And besides this bill, we have a bill dealing with conservatorship to try to help get our most vulnerable population into the help and the treatment that they need by expanding the definition of conservatorship. It's not an easy thing. This is a difficult and a controversial subject. But when people truly can't help themselves, it's up to us to give them that help. So we're working in Sacramento, and we have a true partner in Eric Garcetti here in Los Angeles. So it's my pleasure to introduce our mayor, a visionary, somebody who has a plan and is willing to fight for it every day, Mayor Eric Garcetti. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Assembly members. Thank you for the kind introduction, Assemblymember Freedman, and your championing of this as a new Assembly member really speaks volumes about your priorities, but you also come from local government. There you are, like that. Local government, which I think is an amazing asset to have in Sacramento. And to Miguel Santiago, thank you for your leadership of the toughest neighborhood in America by many measures. A place where when people come, they ask, are we still in this country? A place where it is true, too many people woke up today feeling helpless and hopeless. But today, we help move forward one more step in changing that narrative. Thank you also, and I'll introduce her in a moment, to Anita Nelson, the CEO of SRO Housing Corporation, who represents, with Mark Loringer, the president and CEO of Chrysalis, the incredible tapestry of service providers we have here. While government for decades wasn't doing its part, service providers have been here, moving not just for the handouts that are necessary on these streets, but also the help up in constructing permanent housing, which has been such a difference. Look, this isn't a problem, this is the problem. I was in Washington, D.C., handing over the chairmanship of what we used to call the Big Ten. If we're honest, it's now 11 cities, so the Big 11 mayors, which I've chaired for the last 4 years, to Darrell Steinberg, a former state legislative champion, a warrior on mental health, and somebody who's now the mayor of Sacramento. And that quote that I just gave was Kevin Faulconer's words in San Diego. He said, in San Diego, this isn't an issue, this is the issue. And then Mayor Brand of Fresno said, us too, it is the issue. And Mayor Schaaf in Oakland, and Mayor Garcia in Long Beach. This is the issue defining our state. And while we have tremendous things to be proud of, record-breaking economy, innovation coming out of our universities and our startups, technology which fuels the world, Hollywood which tells the world's stories, the story we want to focus on and the funding we need to continue to bring to bear is right here. Because LA shouldn't be judged on the nicest cars we're inventing and building. It should be who's still sleeping in a car tonight. Not that we have the most amazing restaurants and culinary scene, which we do, but who is still going hungry. And not just the amazing graduates of our top universities, but what young people are aging out of foster care without any place to go but the streets. It is unacceptable. But I have never been more optimistic. I've worked on this issue as a private citizen as well as an elected official since I used to come down here as a 14-year-old and volunteer. And I've never seen, as Assemblymember Freedman said, an actual plan, not just from the city, but the county, which bears probably about 4 or 5 times the load of funding that can solve homelessness. From the voters who voted not just once, but twice in a 4-month period to tax themselves, to provide more housing and the dollars to provide services. We're building 10,000 units of supportive housing over the next decade, spending $355 million each year on the services to get people off the streets. We passed a linkage fee, which will double our production of affordable housing in our city. And the City Council will still hear a first in the state streamlining ordinance for our supportive housing and for our motels, which can be converted into great bridge housing as well. Yes, the city is getting to work. I get asked all the time, but do neighborhoods want this housing? And overwhelmingly, and we'll release some of the detailed statistics on this, but working with United Way, we just polled Angelinos, and they support almost in as high numbers as they voted for supportive housing, to have supportive housing in their own neighborhood, which is a sea change in the past. So we don't just cluster things one place downtown, that we put it in Arleta, that we put it in Venice, that we put it in South LA, that we put it in Wilmington, that we put it all around this city where people not only live, but live on our streets. So, why are we here today? Well, I think it's an honest assessment, and it's before either of these two folks came, that the state has backed away for too many years from affordable housing and funding it. Last year, we saw some brave steps forward, but with the end of redevelopment, we lost almost 100% of our affordable housing funds from the state, while the federal government cut it in half. When I arrived as mayor, we had a quarter of the funding that we had at our peak just 10 years earlier when we had redevelopment and a federal government that was supporting affordable housing at a higher rate. Those cuts have been devastating. You see them on tents in the street. Those cuts have been devastating. You see them in addiction in our neighborhoods. Those cuts have been devastating when half of young people who age out of foster care are either homeless or in jail in the first couple years. By this summer, you will see some of the work that we're doing to coordinate this. We know now how to get a city and county to act together. We're doing it at El Pueblo, where we're putting up on a parking lot that the city owns, shelter for folks who are sleeping near our city's birthplace. We're looking at that in Hollywood. Around this city, we have our first HHH groundbreakings and new supportive housing that we have opened the keys to just recently. Our city, in fact, has housed 30,000 homeless people over the last 4 years. That's more people than are sleeping on the streets. So we can do this. We've increased that pace, but we're up 40%. So 140% of that original number has become homeless, which is why I also support the state work to help make sure that local governments have the tools to be able to make sure that rents don't go up so much. We're leveraging every single possible thing at our disposal. But with a $6.1 billion surplus, that is a reflection of California's greatness. And it should address a reflection of California's greatest challenge, homelessness. So when we were in Washington, D.C., we reached out to our state legislators and we said, let us go after $1.5 billion of that $6 billion. And yes, we will step up because the voters have stepped up. We will be able to match those funds. And here in Los Angeles, where we've already taken bold steps forward that other mayors up and down the state were asking me, how do we get to pass something like that? We will see that leveraged and doubled. We need that local money to go directly to local governments. I know there's some legislation to maybe put that into state agencies, but we can't wait a single day or let red tape stand in the way of one more person getting housed. That's why every single one of the mayors from north to south, inland to the coast, Republican and Democrats, support this legislation to allocate $1.5 billion in general funds to help us address this crisis. Here in LA, that would grow to $764 million, matching with our Triple H funding. And those dollars will go directly to short-term bridge housing so that no one is forced to live in the conditions that we see around us today. We need our state's help. Our people have spoken loudly, and now our legislators here are speaking with that same voice for the people they represent. These are our constituents out here. These are not them and us. We are one city. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Anita Nelson, who is the CEO of SRO Housing Corporation, and as I mentioned, doing God's work, building those walls that bring people off the streets. Anita.
Thank you so much. On behalf of SRO Housing Corporation, I want to welcome you, all of you, to the James Wood Community Center. It is truly an honor and privilege to have Mayor Garcetti and our city and state officials with us today. For the past 34 years, SRO Housing has provided short-term, transitional, and permanent supportive housing right here in Skid Row. We provide over 2,300 units of housing to the most vulnerable. We are committed to doing everything in our power to end homelessness, and we look forward to working with our partners in order to make this happen. And it is now my pleasure to introduce you to one of our longstanding partners, a partner that we've worked side by side for over 20 years, a dear friend of ours, Mr. Mark Loringer, President and CEO of Chrysalis Enterprises.
Good morning. Chrysalis solves for a different part of this tapestry that the mayor was speaking about a few minutes ago. Our mission is to work with men and women that have been homeless, experiencing poverty, and help them get on the path to self-sufficiency through finding and, most importantly, retaining employment. We all know that solving for homelessness is a very complicated issue, and employment is a big piece of that. Every day at our office right down the street at 5th and Main, we see 100 to 150 men and women that are coming to us ready, willing, and able to work, but for a variety of reasons they've been disconnected from the workforce. In fact, many of them are living in some of the buildings that are right around us. Our job is to help them not only maintain and build their income so that they can pay their own way, so they can live here in this great city of Los Angeles, but also think about what a job means to all of us. It's about dignity. It's about self-respect. It's about being able to be reunited with your family, maybe buy your daughter or son a birthday gift. That's what a job really means. That's the dignity that every single person in the park over there and in this neighborhood deserve. And in order to do that, we need resources. In our case at Chrysalis, it costs us about $2,500 to help somebody get a job. Now, you talk to any of us up here about what it costs to deal with this problem on the street from a public safety and an emergency medical standpoint, it's a good investment. Prevention and helping folks through rapid rehousing, bridge housing, and all of the other services that we now have at our fingertips is a really, really key thing that we ought to do, and it's a great investment for the citizens of this state, so we strongly support this bill. Thank you, and Assemblymember, I'll turn it back over to you.
Y brevemente también en español yo quiero decir unas palabras. Esta ciudad y nuestro estado están en crisis. Nuestros residentes están viviendo en las calles porque el costo de renta sigue aumentando. Pero nuestra ciudad está tomando acción para resolver esto. No estamos esperando a que alguien nos salve. En los últimos 4 años hemos proveído un hogar a casi 30,000 angelinos indigentes. Esas son más personas que las que duermen en las calles actualmente. Nuestro progreso es real y se puede medir, pero no podemos hacerlo solos. Es tiempo que nuestros representantes en Sacramento, y gracias a estos 2 líderes aquí, nos ayuden a resolver el problema de la escasez de hogares para nuestros vecinos indigentes. Este lunes, nuestros colegas anunciarán legislación que proveerá $1.5 billones que se podrán utilizar inmediatamente para ayudar a solventar la indigencia aquí en Los Ángeles. Gracias por su liderazgo y esta crisis demanda el liderazgo de todos los representantes en Sacramento, porque este es el tiempo de parar la indigencia en la ciudad de Los Ángeles. With that, happy to take questions.
Mr. Mayor,
yes.
You mentioned the measures that voters already passed
Yeah.
that raise taxes on themselves. Are you at all concerned about fatigue as the population continues to grow and voters know that they've already passed these measures and now they're hearing that even that is not sufficient?
I think people recognize how complex and how difficult this problem is. And yes, everybody is frustrated, would like to see every tent go away tomorrow. But they know it's taken many years and decades to get there. And when I talk to people about what we can do now in their own neighborhoods, that's kind of the next shift of this campaign. If you live someplace you're frustrated, how can we find 250 beds in every neighborhood council would be an end to everybody on the street. So it becomes something you can digest. Maybe they can't do that in 1 year in that, mythical neighborhood in Van Nuys. Well, I can't find 250 beds, but maybe this year there's 50, and we'll support that. And when we see housing, we want to bring that, or a parking lot in a church, we can have parking for RVs and vehicles. So people recognize that that takes time, but I'm not worried about voter fatigue. We're not going to voters with this. I actually see a reflection of an amazing heart in this city, and that frustration that people have is felt universally. And that's why I think it's very important for us not just to look at what's happening on the street, but what's driving people into that homelessness. If we were able to house as many people in 4 years as are homeless tonight, that says something about the drivers and what we need to do in terms of looking at rent, building more housing, and making sure that we have more affordable housing as well.
Mr. Mayor, the Assembly, either one of us, you're saying this measure would basically seek up to $1.5 billion, and here's the operative phrase, one-time state funding program. How long is that one-time state funding going to last among 11 major cities or anything else like that? And who says you're not going to have to go back to the state time and time again to try to, if you will, bump up the amount of money needed to fix homelessness here? Also, there's a great
First, I can answer
phrase,
two.
whether you know it or not. Also, your Assembly people are whether you
Well, this is the beginning of our endeavor to make sure that we get the $1.5 billion that we need. We've got a host of co-authors, and it's and bipartisan support both on the Senate and the Assembly side. So we get to deliberate through the budget process along with moving this bill. So I'm pretty confident that at the end of the day, our colleagues are going to understand how important this issue is because it affects every community up and down the state. Now, in terms of the one-time dollars, now, I won't speak for the city, and I'll let the mayor elaborate a little bit more. From the perspective that we were looking at it from the state, even in the case of Los Angeles, where you've passed certain bond measures and you're doing certain work to accumulate the dollars to make sure this that we begin to eradicate the issue of homelessness, you still need that infusion of dollars to move on this very quickly because people can't live on the streets one more single day when we've got a state surplus. Look, if there's going to be a state surplus next year, I'd be open to a conversation about continuing this. But to be fiscally responsible, right now we've got over $6 billion. This is the time to act.
But you're asking people to do 25% of that surplus for one issue. Is that going to fly?
Well, look, from the conversations that we've had with our colleagues, I don't think that there's a single municipality up and down the state that isn't impacted by the issue of homelessness. So it's one of the most important issues that you face. You know, we walk out of the state capitol, there's people lying on the street. You visit San Francisco, you go to San Diego, you go to Fresno, San Jose. There isn't a city that's been immune to the issue of homelessness. So it resonates, I believe, with most of our colleagues. And I think
I'll just add that there are some things that we can do that require the one-time money that wouldn't need funding in the future, like bringing new housing online. So constructing new temporary housing and permanent affordable housing is something that this money can be used for that's desperately needed. We need to have a bed for every head, and we don't have that right now in Los Angeles. That's not even available. So until we have that, you're never going to end homelessness.
And to that, one last thing on that. I mean, look, we have needs. You can probably take somebody off the street for about $8,000 to $15,000 a year. I'll take that one-time funding to get another 10,000 people off the street, or another 5,000 people, or another 2,000 people. I'll take it for 200 more people than what we're doing, because once you get them off the street, you don't have to pay for it year after year after year. So absolutely, I think it's a conversation worth having for the long term, and voters will have a housing measure on the ballot this year, which is a permanent source of funding, which I hope people will vote for in November. And in the meantime, I think having this money, and I'll give you an example, Measure HHH. We found a shelter in a neighborhood in Los Angeles, but it needs HVAC repairs. That's it. And we can probably get 300 people in it. But HHH doesn't necessarily cover that. Measure H is already accounted for the year. If we had block grant monies like this, we would have that. It would go. We could get 300 people in probably 8 months earlier. So it's very useful.
You declared a state of emergency regarding homelessness, I believe, last year. Is this one way of trying to alleviate that particular condition?
Absolutely. Yes, it is.
And we did it at the state, too, about 2 years ago. Our House in the Assembly declared a state of emergency, which I carried the resolution for. And we did it because we wanted to demonstrate how important this issue was, and we wanted to send it with a good percentage of votes, and we did.
Well, you would talk about how soon the money would go, and then I'll talk about
Right. Well, the way that it works out is any bill would have to get to the governor's desk by September, because that's when the legislative session ends. But we're also seeking to go through the budget process, which would be available after July 1st or June 30th.
The nice thing about this is money that's there. It's not a new tax. Like, a lot of people didn't understand Measure H. They said, wait, I voted for that last year. Why isn't homelessness over? The money only started flowing October 1st. We're hiring 1,000 people from that money right now. So the services this year we will begin to see in a much more aggressive way. But this money is sitting there as a surplus. So we could literally spend it within weeks of receiving it. So that could mean this fall. Yeah. Why is homelessness increasing? How much time do you have? When everybody tells you that it's because the high price of rent, they're correct. When they tell you it's about a foster care crisis, they're correct. When they tell you about veterans coming home, they're correct. When they say it's about addiction, they're correct. When they're saying about mental health and not enough dollars there, they're correct. Criminal justice reforms and not enough of a social safety net to catch people who are coming out of prison and jail, they're correct. All of these things, low wages, they're correct. It is a conspiracy, I think, of all of these. At the most basic level, homelessness comes when people don't have housing. And I think that if you had to boil it down to one thing, you have to look at the price of rent. That a lot of the folks that are out here, or the new ones that would come here, would be still dealing probably with addiction and mental health issues and other challenges and trauma, but they might be hanging on to an apartment they could afford. Right now, there's not enough of that for enough people. It's around the country. You know, when I was in Washington, D.C., we saw all over the nation's capital. I joined with about 20 different mayors who were saying it's happened all the way, not just the West Coast from Seattle to San Diego, but in cities around the country. Some places have a right to shelter law, like New York, but that shelters people but doesn't necessarily put them in permanent housing. I think it's a good economy and housing not being built quickly enough. So a lot of people have come to cities to work and to have jobs, and that's meant that pushing that down, those folks that were just hanging on the edge get pushed out, and many of them are pushed onto the street into storage units or into vehicles or any place else they can shelter because they can't afford the rent. Okay, and I can flag that one to make sure that, but I'll answer that. Do you want to answer the first? Yeah.
Well, I worked on the No Place Like Home, the repurposing of the Prop $63. So there's no doubt there's some frustration on our behalf that it's tied up currently in litigation. But that doesn't stop us from pursuing new avenues or figuring out what we can do with it to take a look at some legal actions to be able to obtain those dollars. So you're accurate about that.
Let me just flag it, see if there's any other homeless questions, and I'll answer that. Yes?
For the cities that don't have an H behind them, how are they expected to come up with these matching dollars?
Well, actually, I think it would depend on the city. Some cities may have residual housing money from redevelopment, or the successor agencies of those cities might still be sitting on some resources. I can tell you Glendale, where I was a council member, is sitting on land that they had purchased through redevelopment. And that's a resource that can be leveraged at this point, and they're desperate to find funding to create affordable housing. And I just want to also emphasize that it's not just that rents are high when we talk about housing, it's that we don't have enough housing. And that's really important for people to understand. Right now we have a situation of musical chairs, and that's partially what drives those rent costs up. So as long as you don't have enough units for the population that you have, you're going to have a crisis. It's essential that we create more units, and that we do that in areas where people can walk and bike near where they work, so that they don't have to drive from the Newhall Pass or from Palmdale to get to Los Angeles. That only exacerbates our problems and creates new kinds of problems. But in California, we've been a leader on climate change. We've been a leader on having a safe place for our immigrants. We can lead the whole country in our response to homelessness, and I think that that's what this measure will do.
How are you going to divide up, there's certain percentages, right? LA's got 25% of the entire state homeless population. The money would be allocated based on those numbers. How do you figure out those numbers when homeless is a fairly fluid situation, right? People come and go, they move city to city, so how do you figure that out?
Well, that's the piece that we're negotiating now, and this is what's unique about this, right? We've got support from Northern California all the way down to San Diego, Los Angeles, so and bipartisan support. So we're sitting back and figuring out the best formula possible, whether it's going to be geographic or population based. Like in our case, population based. I would argue that'd be one of the best metrics of it, because most people will move to Los Angeles and particularly concentrate in Skid Row because of the array of services that we have. But that we'll be negotiating that through the process. But what's unique about this, and different than times in the past, is we're asking the cities to put up monies as well, so that we're not the only ones giving, and they'll have to put it. Los Angeles is well placed, well positioned, I should say, to be able to continue the work. But we need that immediate infusion, or that shot of steroids, as I like to call it, to get this, to get folks back off the streets.
To the earlier question, absolutely. I believe that mayors should be advocates, and I'm a proud advocate for immigrants. Immigrants drive our economy, $3.2 billion here in LA County's GDP. 60+% of the businesses on our main streets are started by immigrants. When a cop was shot in December here in MacArthur Park area, we were able to find her attempted murderer within a half hour because immigrants trusted our police department and said he went that away. even though some of those folks were probably undocumented, as our police chief said. To attack immigrants is to attack us. And I think that while we want to work with federal law enforcement agencies to get dangerous criminals off our streets who are also undocumented, to have a strategy in the ocean where you stop with your limited resources going after the sharks and instead throw a net in there, and because you're picking up 10 guppies and you're saying that's more than one, that shark's still out there. It is impractical, it is bad, and this White House has actually taken funding dollars away from our police officers who do things like anti-gang work against MS-13. It's ironic. He talks one way, but he's actually putting his dollars away from the same police officers who make us safe. So I absolutely support Mayor Schaaf. I think it is important for us, whether it was through the Justice Fund here, because people who have an adequate defense are, I think, 7 times more likely to have a positive resolution to their civil immigration concerns, advocating for particular cases, and or continuing to have good, strong relationships with our immigrant community, with law enforcement. That is the role of our cities. They got to catch a plane, so anything for them, or they got to go? Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you, Mr.
guys.
Mayor.
You're released. This will now be a city press conference. Thank you to our assembly members, by the way. I want to thank them. Take one more question. Our Los Angeles Police Department tries its best to get that information. The chief and the head of ICE here speak frequently. There are certain notifications that go out, but usually after, and we've had that in past administrations, but you'll have to ask the chief. I haven't talked to him about this latest round, and my understanding is last time there was no notification. It is important for local law enforcement to have those sorts of notifications, by the way, because oftentimes the support that is needed if situations turn bad will come to police no matter what. Somebody will call 911, and that's why I've always said to our federal law enforcement officials, you need local law enforcement. You can't ignore or disregard, or as we're seeing from the commander-in-chief, defund and disparage our local law enforcement, and I never will. Okay, thank you. We didn't get any this time. In the past, no, they have a job to do, and we work with federal officials on things like going after multinational gangs, traffickers of women and children and workers, and that's important work to do. But the kind of indiscriminate ICE raids, 7-Eleven raids and things like that, you know, when we have dangerous criminals, why would we be using resources to go after 7-Eleven clerks? It seems like the wrong thing. It's a hypothetical. I haven't gotten that, but to me, it's very important to know the particulars of a situation. I'm not going to give people heads up who are the traffickers of women that there's going to be a raid on them, but it depends on the situation. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.